The afternoon moved slowly across the open plain, its light thinning as it filtered through a veil of dust and heat. Along the edge of a drying riverbed, where cracked mud folded into itself like old parchment, a lone lioness lay stretched on her side. Her body did not rise and fall in the steady rhythm of rest. Instead, her breathing came in shallow, uneven pulls, barely lifting the ribs beneath her dust-matted fur. From a distance, she seemed almost like part of the landscape itself, another pale shape shaped by sun and time. A wildlife ranger, moving carefully along his usual patrol route, noticed her stillness before he noticed her form. It was the absence of motion that caught his eye first. Lions rarely lay so openly in daylight without shifting, scanning, responding to sound. He slowed his pace instinctively, letting each step sink softly into the brittle ground. Through his binoculars, he saw the faint tremor in her flank, the subtle tightening of her jaw, the way one foreleg lay twisted slightly beneath her weight. There were marks along her shoulder, thin dark lines where fur had parted and dried blood had settled. Not fresh enough to bleed, not old enough to fade. Her tongue slipped out once, briefly, touching the edge of her mouth, searching for moisture that was no longer there. When a dry wind passed over her, she lifted her head a few inches, then let it fall back with visible effort. The movement cost her more than it should have. The ranger stopped several meters away and lowered himself slowly to one knee. He did not raise his camera. He did not reach for his radio. He watched first. Experience had taught him that rushed movement often did more harm than help. Animals in fragile states lived in narrow margins, where panic could tip survival into collapse. He noted the absence around her. No tracks of cubs nearby. No fresh signs of a pride resting in the shade. Only scattered prints fading into the dust, pointing in different directions, as if a story had been interrupted and left unfinished. Separation in this landscape was dangerous. A lone lioness, injured and dehydrated, carried no safety net. A small insect landed briefly on her ear. She flicked it away weakly. Her eyes opened halfway, revealing a dull amber sheen that struggled to focus. They drifted across the plain, passed over the kneeling figure without recognition, and closed again. Her tail twitched once, then lay still. The ranger shifted his weight, easing himself into a more stable position. His voice, when it came, was barely more than breath. "Easy, just rest," he murmured, not expecting understanding, offering presence more than instruction. Minutes stretched. Heat shimmered. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called and fell silent. The lioness's breathing continued its uneven pattern, sometimes pausing long enough to make the ranger hold his own breath in response. Each pause ended in a shallow pull of air, as if she were climbing slowly back from a deep place. He remained where he was, eyes steady, posture open, hands resting quietly on his knees. Intervention would come if it was needed. For now, observation was the first form of care. Around them, the riverbed lay empty and pale, its last traces of water reduced to memory. Above it, the sun drifted lower, casting long shadows that stretched toward the silent form of the lioness, holding her in soft, patient light. Morning heat gathered slowly across the plain, settling into the soil and rising again in thin, wavering lines. By the time the ranger returned, the air already carried the weight of another dry day. He was not alone now. A second vehicle waited at a distance, partially hidden behind low brush, its engine long since cooled. Supplies had been gathered carefully and sparingly: clean water, bandages, antiseptic solution. A small medical kit carried countless times into uncertain situations. He approached on foot, moving along the same path he had memorized the day before, careful not to disturb the fragile stillness around her. The lioness had shifted only slightly during the night. Her body now curved inward as if conserving warmth, though the temperature no longer required it. Her breathing remained shallow but more frequent, like waves breaking gently against a narrow shore. When he knelt beside her, he saw what distance had concealed. Beneath layers of dust and matted fur, deep wounds traced across her shoulder and flank. The skin had torn unevenly, likely from a territorial clash or a desperate escape. Infection had begun to settle into the edges, darkening the flesh. Dehydration had tightened her muscles, leaving her frame drawn and brittle beneath her coat. He paused before touching her. His presence alone had already registered. One ear flicked. Her eyes opened slightly, cloudy with exhaustion. A low, trembling sound slipped from her chest. Not a roar, not a warning, but something quieter, closer to uncertainty than threat. Her foreleg shifted weakly, claws scraping softly against the dry ground. "It's all right, easy now," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the breeze. With slow, deliberate movements, He poured a small amount of water into a shallow container and slid it within reach. She did not drink immediately. Her nose hovered above it, breathing in, hesitating. After several moments, her tongue extended once, then again, touching the surface with cautious restraint. Each sip was shallow, measured, as if her body feared taking more than it could hold. When he began cleaning the wounds, he worked with restrained precision. Cloth moved gently across torn fur, lifting dirt without pulling. Antiseptic darkened the skin as it flowed over damaged tissue. At each touch, her muscles tightened briefly, then loosened. Soft sounds escaped her throat, uneven and strained, not resistance, but acknowledgement of discomfort endured rather than fought. Her eyes remained open now, tracking his movements in slow arcs. There was fear there, unmistakable and reasonable. But there was also stillness. She did not attempt to rise. She did not strike. Trust, in animals, often appeared first as the decision not to flee. One of the backup rangers crouched several meters away, ready but silent. No unnecessary words passed between them. Every action followed a rhythm shaped by patience. Bandages were applied loosely, allowing movement and breath. Fluids were offered in intervals. Shade cloth was adjusted to soften the sun's growing intensity. The work unfolded in measured time, without urgency that might fracture the fragile balance they had built. When it was finished, the ranger leaned back slightly, giving her space. She released a long, wavering breath and settled her head more fully against the earth. A faint tremor passed through her body and faded. Around them, heat shimmered across the riverbed. Dry grass whispered against itself in the light wind. The day continued forward, indifferent yet gentle, while beneath its steady warmth, a wounded lioness rested inside a narrow pocket of care and quiet restraint. As evening approached, the light softened and stretched across the savanna in long amber bands. Heat slowly loosened its grip on the land, releasing stored warmth from stone and soil. Shadows gathered beneath thorn trees and along the dry riverbed, folding themselves around the resting lioness. Her body remained where it had been left, wrapped loosely in bandages and shade cloth, her sides rising and falling with fragile persistence. The rescue team withdrew to a careful distance as night settled in. A small camp was arranged far enough away to avoid pressure, close enough to observe. No fires were lit. Only dim lamps glowed briefly before being switched off, replaced by starlight and the pale wash of a rising moon. Silence returned in layers, broken only by insects and distant calls drifting across the open plain. The lioness did not rest easily. As darkness deepened, her breathing grew heavier, more labored. Shallow pulls of air turned into strained, uneven draws, followed by long pauses that tightened every observer's chest. Her body trembled at intervals, small shivers passing through her limbs despite the lingering warmth. Fever worked quietly beneath her skin, raising her temperature, draining what little strength remained. At regular intervals, the ranger approached with measured steps. Each time, he paused before crossing the final meters, allowing her to register his presence without surprise. He placed water nearby, refreshed damp cloths, adjusted the shade structure to block the moon's glare. His hands moved slowly, never lingering longer than necessary. "You're doing well, stay with us," he murmured once, softly enough that it barely disturbed the night. Her response was never direct. Sometimes her ears shifted. Sometimes her tail moved weakly against the dust. Once, a low, broken sound slipped from her throat, fragile and uncertain, more breath than voice. It faded quickly, leaving only the rhythm of her uneven breathing behind. Hours passed in quiet vigilance. The team took turns watching, resting in brief fragments, always keeping one pair of eyes on her form. Predators moved in the far distance, their silhouettes sliding across ridgelines, unaware or uninterested in the fragile island of stillness below. The savanna continued its ancient routines, indifferent yet surrounding her with life. Near midnight something changed. The ranger noticed it first as a subtle shift. Her breathing pattern altered, becoming irregular in a different way. Short, shallow breaths were followed by deeper, trembling ones. Her abdomen tightened and released, not in the usual rhythm of respiration but in brief, strained pulses. Her body curled slightly inward, then relaxed, then curled again. At first he assumed pain had intensified. He rose quietly and approached, lowering himself beside her once more. The cloth along her flank had slipped, revealing more of her side. As he adjusted it, he saw faint movement beneath the skin, a gentle tightening that did not match injury or fever alone. He froze watching. The motion came again, subtle but unmistakable. A slow contraction followed by stillness. Then another, deeper this time. Her breathing synced with it, growing more deliberate, more focused. The trembling that had marked exhaustion shifted into something else. Controlled, purposeful, drawn from instinct older than suffering. The realization settled slowly among the team as they observed in silence. The injuries were real. The dehydration was real. But beneath it all, another force was at work. She was not only fighting to survive. She was carrying life. No one spoke it aloud. They adjusted their distance, softened their movements further, as if the night itself required gentler handling now. Water was placed closer. Shade was reinforced. Hands withdrew. Under the wide scatter of stars, beside the empty riverbed, a wounded lioness lay breathing through pain and fever, her body quietly preparing for something more. The wind moved through dry grass in low whispers, and far away, unseen herds shifted in the darkness, while life gathered itself, fragile and persistent, in the still center of the night. The darkness thinned slowly, giving way to pale bands of early light along the eastern horizon. Night sounds softened and retreated, replaced by the first distant calls of waking birds. Dew settled briefly on dry grass before vanishing under returning warmth. In the quiet hours before sunrise, the lioness lay alert in a way she had not been for days, her body tense, her breathing deliberate and focused. The team had already adjusted their positions, widening the space around her, reducing their presence to the smallest necessary measure. No engine started. No radios crackled. Everything unfolded in near silence, shaped by instinct and restraint. They watched from afar, understanding that this moment belonged to her. Her abdomen tightened again more firmly now. Muscles gathered beneath thinning fur, then released in slow, controlled waves. Each contraction drew a low, strained sound from her chest, barely audible, carried away almost immediately by the morning breeze. Between each effort, she rested her head against the earth, eyes half closed, conserving what little strength remained. The ranger observed the rhythm carefully. He had witnessed births before, though rarely under such conditions. Injury, dehydration, isolation, all of it weighed heavily against her. Yet her body continued forward, guided by forces deeper than exhaustion. "Easy, you're all right," he whispered once, more to steady himself than to guide her. She did not look toward him. Her attention was fully inward now, focused on sensations that required every fragment of awareness. Her tail shifted slightly, brushing the dust. Her sides expanded and tightened. Time stretched into slow, patient segments, marked only by her breathing and the subtle movement of grass. As the sun finally edged above the horizon, its light touched her fur, warming the pale gold and worn brown along her back. With one final, extended effort, her body gathered itself, then released. A small, dark shape emerged quietly onto the earth, slick and trembling, scarcely larger than her foreleg. For a moment there was no movement. Then the cub stirred. A faint ripple passed through its tiny body. Its limbs twitched uncertainly. A soft, fragile sound escaped its throat, thin and uneven, almost lost in the open air. The lioness lifted her head with visible effort, eyes widening as they found the small form beside her. Slowly, carefully she turned toward it. Her nose touched the cub first, a brief, gentle contact. She inhaled deeply, memorizing its scent. Then her tongue extended, brushing across its damp fur in steady, deliberate strokes. Each movement was slow, measured, shaped by fatigue and determination intertwined. The cub responded instinctively, pressing closer, seeking warmth. Its body trembled lightly against her chest. She shifted her injured frame to curve around it, forming a protective barrier despite the pain that movement caused. A low, steady sound emerged from her throat, soft and rhythmic, a signal of presence and reassurance. The team remained still, scarcely breathing. No cameras were raised. No notes were taken. This was not data. This was survival unfolding in its most fragile form. The sun climbed higher, spilling gold across the grassland. Light caught in drifting dust. Somewhere far away, a herd moved slowly toward water. Near the empty riverbed, a wounded mother lay curled around her newborn, her breath steadying, her strength reorganizing itself around a single, quiet purpose. The weeks that followed unfolded without spectacle, marked instead by small, persistent changes that only patient observation could reveal. Each morning brought subtle signs of recovery. Her breathing deepened. Her movements grew more deliberate and controlled. The stiffness in her injured shoulder softened gradually, replaced by cautious strength. Bandages were removed in stages, allowing skin to breathe and scar tissue to settle into its new shape. Water was offered less frequently as she began to seek it on her own. Shade structures were dismantled piece by piece, returning the riverbed to its quiet, empty state. Throughout this slow transformation, the cub remained close. At first, it stayed pressed against her chest, its small body hidden beneath her curved frame. Later, it began to lift its head, blinking against sunlight, responding to distant sounds with uncertain turns of its ears. Within days it found its legs. They wobbled, folded, and rose again. It followed her in short, uneven bursts, stopping often to rest, always returning instinctively to the safety of her side. The lioness watched constantly. Her head turned at every unfamiliar sound. Her posture shifted subtly when shadows moved too quickly. Even as her strength returned, caution remained woven into every step. She fed when she could, sharing space with her cub, guiding it gently with nudges of her nose and the placement of her body. Low, steady vocalizations passed between them, quiet signals of location and reassurance carried on the wind. The rescue team adjusted their presence as her independence grew. Visits became shorter. Distance widened. Observation replaced intervention. Their role slowly receded as it was always meant to. Survival in the end belonged to her. One morning, just after sunrise, change arrived without announcement. Fresh tracks appeared along the edge of the riverbed, overlapping with her own. Larger prints. Multiple sets. The scent of other lions drifted faintly through the grass. The ranger noticed it first and signaled silently to the others. They took up their positions at a respectful distance and waited. She sensed it before she saw them. Her body stiffened. Her head lifted. Her ears rotated forward. The cub pressed closer, responding to the shift in her posture. For several long moments she remained still, reading the invisible messages carried in the air. Then, slowly she began to move. From the far side of the plain, shapes emerged, first one, then several, sliding through tall grass with practiced ease. Members of her pride approached in loose formation, unhurried, alert. There was no rushing. No display. Only recognition unfolding through scent, posture, and sound. A low call passed between them, soft and restrained. She answered quietly. The distance closed. Noses touched briefly. Heads brushed. Tails flicked in familiar patterns. The cub hesitated, then stepped forward, guided by her steady presence. One of the older females lowered her head, breathing in its scent. Another stood watch, scanning the horizon. The reunion lasted only minutes, yet it carried the weight of weeks. Soon the pride began to move again, drifting toward higher grass and distant shade. The lioness followed, adjusting her pace to match the small, determined steps beside her. Once she glanced back, her gaze passing briefly over the watching figures on the ridge, not in awareness, but in alignment with the wide living landscape she belonged to. Then she turned forward. Tall grass closed around them, stems whispering softly as bodies passed through. Gold and shadow blended. Shapes dissolved into motion and distance. Within moments, there was nothing left but flattened blades and fading tracks. The rescuers remained where they were. No one spoke. Wind moved through dry leaves. A bird lifted from nearby brush and disappeared into open sky. Somewhere beyond sight, a pride traveled together again, carrying scars, memory, and new life into the endless rhythm of the savannah.